Hey everybody, this is Dr. Jacobs. Welcome to our last unit on late adulthood. During this week, there are a few things that I'd like you to be able to do by the end of the unit. I'd like you to be able to distinguish between the different designations in late adulthood. I'd like you to be able to explain aging and the different types. I'd like you to be able to describe two major sensory motor changes and their underlying physical causes. I want you to be able to explain why elder speak is particularly troublesome for people in late adulthood. I want you to be able to explain how memory changes in late adulthood. I want you to be able to explain neurocognitive disorder, NCD, and two primary causes. I want you to be able to provide real-life examples of integrity versus despair. I want you to be able to compare and contrast activity and disengagement theories. All right, so let's get started. Late adulthood spans from age 65 years old through death. So why do you think, just shout this out loud, why do you think late adulthood starts at 65? If you said you thought it was because that's when people start to retire, that's absolutely correct. However, if we start looking at least retirement within the United States, we're seeing that my generation and probably many of your all's generations won't actually be able to retire until age 67. And so that's really interesting how we have kind of some of these set dates, but what actually triggers late adulthood is the commonly accepted age for retiring. So there's different designations people can get when they are in late adulthood. So people who are considered young old are people who are healthy, active, financially secure, and independent. So our material said this is ages 60 to 75. However, when we're trying to characterize people in which designation that they have, it's more based on the characteristics of the designation than it is the actual ages. So if you're still healthy, active, financially secure, and independent at age 80, then you're still considered young old. We also have old old. And this is when people have some reductions in physical or mental ability or in social support, but they can still care for themselves and they're proud of that. Our materials consider this 80 plus. And then we have oldest old, and this one is where people are infirm or at risk for illness or injury. This is over 85. People who are in this typically need around-the-clock care. It may be in some sort of facility that helps provide that care, or with family that may provide that care for them as well. So a centenarian then is a person who is 100 years or older. I am still kind of salty that Betty White didn't get to make it to her 100th birthday, that she was just 2-ish weeks shy of that, because she had that big birthday planned, and I thought she was just a treasure. Something that's really interesting is that 80% of centenarians are women. So although they have these designations that are used for people in late adulthood, some gerontologists don't like some of the wording that's used with it. And so actually some gerontologists or scientists who study aging and late adulthood rather us use something else other than old. And I find this funny because some of these things can be considered maybe worse. So they say there's optimal aging, usual aging, and impaired pathological aging. I think just in terms of me, I almost rather be called oldest old than impaired and pathological aging. So then we also have selective optimization with compensation again. This is where we focus on a task. So these are kind of strategies that we can use to still be able to navigate some of the challenges that we have as we age. So one part of this is being able to focus on the tasks that you're wanting to accomplish, optimize your ability to successfully complete that task using your strengths, and then compensate for any weaknesses that you have. So life expectancy, it kept dropping and dropping. I don't know that I've seen the updated numbers for this, but it keeps continuing to drop, and it dropped again even in 2021. And so the female life expectancy is 79.1 years, and the male life expectancy is 73.2. So a healthy lifestyle, this is really important to help make sure that people are having less complications with their health. And some of these things include diets rich in plants and nuts, Being physically active is a really important part of a healthy lifestyle in late adulthood. Refraining from smoking, and continuing to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night, and having a strong social network, avoiding stress, prioritizing happiness. And something that's really interesting about sleep is we see that sleep changes when people get into late adulthood. A lot of times, people will struggle to get the 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night, but they make up for it by sleeping throughout the day and having naps throughout the day. And so that's some ways that people try to compensate for the lack of sleep that they're getting at night. So quality of life, the active life expectancy, these are the number of years a person can be expected to live without having major disabilities. It is something that was interesting. Females are more likely to live with disabilities than males are. Aging, senescence is the gradual deterioration of functional characteristics. We consider having primary aging when these are just the inevitable changes that are associated with getting older, right? These are ones that are just natural and a part of life. Whereas secondary aging is these are changes that are caused by illness or disease, not typical aging. So if you are someone who is a cigarette smoker and you start having really deep set wrinkles and maybe yellowing teeth and things like that, that's because of smoking the cigarettes, and that would be considered secondary aging. There's also things that will age people just because there's just different illnesses and diseases that they have as well. So typical aging, things that happen, heart muscles start to thicken, arteries start becoming less flexible, lung capacity diminishes, and some brain cells start losing some functioning. Kidneys also become less efficient at removing waste from blood. Sometimes the bladder loses ability to store urine. And then in late adulthood, body fat starts to stabilize finally, and then it declines. And then muscle mass is lost if people are not continuing to exercise. And then we also see a decline in bone mineral, especially if a person is female and after going through menopause, the reductions in estrogen stop having, it starts making it so that the bones can weaken. This is why people in female bodies are more likely to have osteoporosis or porous bones than people in male bodies do. Vision. Presbyopia is age-related difficulties with seeing close objects. This is because the lens of the eye thickens and becomes less bendy. Pupils also start to shrink, and the optic nerve becomes less efficient. So it becomes harder to see distance objects as well. You can also have a loss of peripheral vision. I'm telling you all the happy things this week. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go on into aging. There's also more light that's needed to see. So sometimes people, when they're in late adulthood, then will have really difficulty driving at night. So if you have a family member that might be older, they might struggle to drive when it's dark outside. So they may say, I need to be home by this time, so they don't have to drive in the dark. Reading can also become more difficult. Okay, so there's different eye diseases. Glaucoma occurs when there's pressure in the fluid of the eye, it increases. Cataracts is kind of a cloudy or opaque areas of the lens of the eye that interfere with the passing of light. And a lot of people get cataracts. There is a really common cataract surgery that people will have where, and this is going to be kind of a trigger warning because it's kind of graphic a little bit, but they scrape the lens off the eye and then replace it with kind of another type of material that mimics the lens of the eye. And they actually can only do one eye at a time. So you go in and get that done. You're actually awake during the whole thing. I think it takes about 15 minutes to do. And then after that one heals, they have you come back and they do the other eye. There's also macular degeneration. This is also the most common cause of blindness in late adulthood where the macula is affected. There's also diabetic and this is a medical condition where the retina is damaged because of diabetes. So this is really important that if you have diabetes, that you continue to get eye checkups and also to inspect, like this is separate, but also inspect your feet as well. Hearing. So something called presbycusis is age-related difficulty in hearing. In late adulthood, we see that hearing receptors start atrophying in the inner ear. And this becomes a problem too. If you are exposing yourself at your age right now to a lot of loud noises, this can be really problematic for you because once you damage your hearing, it's irreversible. And so there's a meme going around on the internet right now where it's saying like people shouldn't stigmatize wearing earplugs at concerts because if there's a certain decibel that your hearing starts being impacted, and most concerts are above that threshold. So earplugs, and they have ones that have filters so you can still hear it, but it reduces the decibel level so it doesn't damage your ears. Once that is gone, there's no getting it back the way it was before. So we also have a frequency test. So go ahead and exit out of this lecture, go do the frequency hearing test, and then come back. And then there will also be another thing about mosquito ringtones. So go do those right now and then come back to this lecture. All right, so with these, it's problematic when people get to late adulthood, or not late adulthood, as you age, you start not being able to hear frequencies as high as you used to. And it's really interesting because since I started teaching, I've actually lost the ability to hear certain frequencies. And I've been here for quite a while now from when I first started doing this. And it's really interesting to see how that progresses across the lifespan. And so we're going to tie that into what we talk about with something called elder speak. So again, as we age, we have a harder time hearing higher frequencies, okay? And elder speak, often sometimes people will try to talk to people in late adulthood as if they're a child. So they do this by increasing the pitch of their voice using elongated speech where kind of talking sing-song to a person. And this is problematic for a whole bunch of different reasons. Why do you think this is problematic? It's problematic because when we start to lose the high pitch, also elongating speech can cause problems too. So the best thing to do is if someone who can't hear you is not change the tone of the voice or change how you're saying things, but to actually just increase the volume without increasing the pitch. So heart disease is another thing. This is the leading cause of death from chronic disease in adults that are older than 65 years old. And here is actually one of the leading causes of death where we could see different things and how they change across the lifespan. And then in 65 plus, we see heart diseases first. Then we see malignant neoplasms. During 2020, COVID was the third leading cause of death. The fourth was cerebrovascular. Fifth was Alzheimer's disease. So we have all of these different types of ways that people pass. So we also have information processing. This is the theory that relates to how we process information, just like it sounds. What was our metaphor for this theory? Our metaphor for this theory was a computer, okay? So when we're doing this, our working memory, this is the cognitive system with a limited capacity that's responsible for temporarily holding information available for processing. So this is information that you have right in the moment. You're able to remember it while you're working with it. And if you don't process that information or you don't encode that information into your long-term memory, it goes away. So in our metaphor, our working memory is basically, it could be thought of as typing, right? So working memory capacity starts to decrease in late adulthood. Long-term memory then is like our hard drive if we're thinking about our metaphor for this. And this involves storing information for long periods of time. Effective storage is more important than for how long the information's been stored. So if you are able to effectively store information with some sort of organizational structure, you're more likely to be able to remember it no matter how long you've been trying to remember that information. We also have divided attention. This is attention to two or more channels of information at the same time, so that two or more tasks may be performed concurrently. So we know that we actually can't multitask. We can't think of two things exactly at the same time. But with divided attention, what you can do is oscillate your attention back and forth so that you can still perform the tasks concurrently. So people in late adulthood, though, experience more difficulties in divided attention types of tasks. Okay. We also have major neurocognitive disorder, or NCDs. This formerly was known as dementia. People go back and forth on this terminology for it. So for a while, dementia was considered a slur, but there was major pushback because people couldn't remember what major neurocognitive disorder was, NCD. And so there's quite a division on how to refer these types of disorders. But these are major neurocognitive disorders is basically an umbrella category. And what it does is it's used to describe general long-term and often gradual decreases in the ability to think and remember that affects a person's daily functioning. So they believe there's different causes for NCDs. One is vascular neurocognitive disorder, a neurocognitive disorder due to Alzheimer's disease. So with where research is right now with Alzheimer's disease, what they see is that there's neurofibrillary, I can talk, tangles, which is twisted strands of abnormal filaments within a neuron that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. They also see amyloid plaques, which are a clump of beta amyloid protein surrounded by degenerated dendrites. So then we also have integrity versus despair. This is the last psychosocial stage that we'll study in this class. And so with this, who was our theorist for that again? Our theorist for psychosocial stages was Erikson. And this is where the challenge is looking back on your life and determine whether you were satisfied with it or unsatisfied with it. Something that's interesting is Joan Erikson, who was Erik Erikson's wife, created the 9th stage after Erik Erikson's death. And that one I don't know a whole lot about and is actually almost never taught about, but it is a culmination of all the previous 8 stages. So we also have the activity theory in late adulthood. And this is a theory about how people can best adjust to adapting to late adulthood. Recommendations include getting involved in voluntary and leisure organizations, taking care of children, and other social activities. And so we have the activity theory, and then we also have an opposing theory, which is really interesting, called the disengagement theory. And this theory suggests that people in late adulthood shouldn't be discouraged from their inclination towards solitude and greater inactivity. So they're saying we shouldn't just push people in late adulthood to do activities all the time. Like being in solitude is not necessarily a bad thing. It's okay that they may not want to do things all the time. And it's really interesting because there's a lot of cultural implications between the disagreement between these two different theories. They also have the continuity theory. And this is as people age, they continue to view the self in much the same way they did when they were younger. So people view themselves as the same people, just in older bodies. Ageism is also a really big deal within late adulthood. And ageism is basically prejudice and discrimination based on age. Although it's most often thought about in terms of people in late adulthood, we actually see this earlier on in lifespan as well. But however, ageism is not as common in all cultures. In America, there is quite a bit of ageism that occurs. There are also different grandparenting types. First one is the remote grandparents. These are people who rarely see their grandchildren, typically on birthdays or holidays. Companionate grandparents do things with grandchildren, but have little authority or control over them. Involved grandparents take an active role in the lives of their grandchildren. They may even live with them. We also have widowhood that often occurs during late adulthood as well. And there's something called the widowhood mortality effect. And this is a tendency for after one spouse passes away, that the other one passes away within a few years, within a pretty short time period. We also have the socio-emotional selectivity theory. Again, this is where older adults become more selective in their friendships than when they were younger. And they also become more selective about what they choose to do with their time. So this is all we have for this week. I have really enjoyed having you all in this class, and I hope you've learned a lot. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a great week.